Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Strategic Insights for IT Projects, Managing Complexities and Controlling Costs. We're excited to have you with us. Before we get started, I'd like to quickly cover a few housekeeping details. First, you may have noticed that you're currently on mute, but don't worry, you can still interact with us by submitting any questions using the question box located on the GoToWebinar panel. If you run into any technical issues during the session, feel free to use that same question box and we'll assist you as soon as possible. We'll try our best to address all your questions during the presentation, but if we run out of time, don't worry, our team will follow up with you via email, or you can connect with your Velosio account manager for further details. All right, let's get started. I'm excited to introduce our very own Carrie Gabrus and from New View Strategies, Kim Congleton, who will be leading today's session. Carrie and Kim, thanks for joining us. I'm going to let you take it away from here.
All right, thank you. My name is Kim Congleton. I'm the Chief Operating Officer and co-owner of New View Strategies. I've been in IT for about 25 years, and I've known Carrie, I think, for about 15 of that. So,
We
Carrie?
did decide on 15 years. Yes, we did.
Yes,
I'm Carrie
yes.
Gabrus. I'm the practice director here for the Business Central practice at Velosio. And over that time, I've been here about 3 years. I've been in the space of, this is my 26th year, specifically with NAV Business Central. And yeah, Kim and I have been both co-workers, client partner relationships. And so we have embarked on a lot of projects together. So we hope you find the content we're going to present to you valuable.
All right, so session objectives. What we're going to learn today. So we're going to learn about critical thinking strategies for project success, keeping your project on the intended path. We're going to talk about preventing budget overruns and ensuring on-time delivery. And then the agenda, we're kind of going to split this up, Carrie and I. We're going to tag team it. So we're going to start with planning business requirements and process reviews, assess current systems and tools, get your data in order. That's always a big one and a fun one. Assemble a cross-functional team in testing and training and rollout and evaluation.
It looks like a lot of content that's there, but what we're really looking to do is just give you some tips and tricks kind of within each of these topics on things, like I said, we've just learned through going through many projects together. So if we start out with the planning and business requirements and process review, near and dear to my heart, I think that change management is very often not given the weight that it deserves on its value add to any type of implementation software project. Change is hard for people, whether it's positive for the company overall and a good change, it's hard. So I think the planning with change management, realizing that that really does need to be an element that is addressed during implementations or software projects. Planning on the focus that needs to take place. Everyone has their own job to do as well. And then just having realistic expectations. There will be unplanned events. There will be new requirements. It will be hard. And harnessing your power to pivot. So I think if you expect change, it's easier to know that you just need to pivot. But in the end, making a decision is better than no decision. And knowing that if you need to course correct later on, then that's something that is you're always able to do. But I think really setting those expectations, knowing that people are going to have a difficult time moving through and that there will be unplanned events. So this is just kind of a good graphic that we like to put in front of people. Pace, so stay excited. ERP implementations can be exhausting. Priorities, right? There's competing tasks. Very often companies will look at potentially bringing in temporary help to do maybe some tasks or lower priority tasks that can be offloaded. Making sure that your people can engage. Listen first, talk second. I think, what is it? You have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and they should be used proportionately. So I think really making sure part of change management is knowing that people feel heard and validated, and that you're at least able to understand what it is that they're trying to convey. Security. Again, change means fear. So a lot of people need to understand that they have a secure place. and that they're valued for the work that they're doing. It's really important to find your champions or natural leaders and influencers within your groups. There's nothing better than a peer champion to help bring along the rest of the group in change management. And then success, define it and show the data. So I've had clients that do things such as send out a weekly newsletter, right? That just has a blurb or an interview with somebody that just finished something on the project that week within a particular department or something like that. So finding ways to stay engaged and excited. Fear of the unknown is what you're trying to mitigate. And then some statements that we hear often from implementations that definitely will cost you money or create noise, let's say. Kim, you want to help me out on this one?
Yeah, sure. I love this first one. The new system needs to function the same as the old one does. There's nothing that will make the cost of the implementation go up and up and up like this statement. So trying to rebuild a system that didn't work for you in the first place and wasn't as efficient as the new system really is not going to be a good idea. And then the next one, we don't need requirements. I know what the system needs to do. I think you've heard that one the most, Carrie. How many times have you heard that?
Definitely the most.
We only want one bin for the whole warehouse. I can't tell you how many times I've heard this one. And it's never a good idea because if you can't find the inventory now and you put in a new system to help you find the inventory and you still only put it in one bin, you're still not going to know where it is. This is a priority for the team, but they still have to do their real job. I think this one, it kind of goes back to setting realistic expectations. So if your people are already overloaded and then you're not going to figure out a way to free them up or help them be a part of the project where they have enough time to actually do their project work, this can cause overruns on budget like nothing else. We don't need to track inventory in the system. This is Barb. She's our WMS. I must have been on inventory kick when we made these, but I've heard this a couple times. And then what happens is if Barb's sick, nobody knows where anything is in the system. So that again can cost a lot of money if you're spending hours and hours looking for something. Just configure it and show us how to use it. I think that one's kind of self-explanatory. It kind of goes back to not being able to talk about your requirements and communicate your requirements properly.
Yeah, I think the common theme just is really it's not planning, right? It's not sitting down and having a conversation about what is it you're really looking for out of a different system. Strategically, what does your company need to be now going forward, not where have I been, right? There's a reason that the rear view mirror is a lot smaller than the windshield. So I think really taking the time to invest in the planning and engagement. What it does is it stops a lot of retraining in the future that has to happen. It stops a lot of redundant conversations or ones that have to be repeated multiple times. And that's just going to equate to money and time as well.
Yep.
Thanks, Kim. So this is one of my favorite exercises that I like to put in front of people during kickoffs and kind of just make them realize about that change management and how it's going to be uncomfortable. If you look at this picture and pick out 5 things right away, let's say, or 3 things that stick out to you. Well, and then if you take that picture and you turn it 90 degrees, automatically you see different things or the picture looks different in some way. And really the point being that we all have our siloed view of our work. We have our siloed view of what our work, how it integrates with other departments, let's say, or other functional areas. And so sometimes you just have to get up out of your own seat and see something from someone else's point of view. And so I think really allowing people to open up their minds and have conversations about what they need really takes away, again, it mitigates a lot of that fear and helps people just collaborate around requirements and what truly is needed for the business. So requirements being very important, near and dear to my heart. Do you have current processes documented? Are your processes working? We want to talk a lot about, you're moving towards a different solution for certain business reasons. So I know a lot of clients that will go through a lot of work and effort to document current processes, which it's great to understand what you're doing and why, but it's not because that's what's going to necessarily carry forward. So you just want to be really careful in having that balance of what processes work for us, or are we looking at it as a way to identify what the heck we're doing today and what we maybe do or don't want to do going forward. So very important things to think about walking into the requirements conversations. And then if you don't internally have someone who can capture requirements and has a really good understanding for what that is, it's very important that you find out that your partner has the ability to do that. And that really leads us into requirements and characteristics. So, requirements, feasible, do they fit within the time and scope and budget of this project? Are they complete? Is it a requirement that stands alone all by itself and isn't linked to other dependencies, let's say? Or if it's linked to dependencies, does it still stand alone on its own? Can it be tested by itself? Is it concise? Does it have just very specific pieces to it and it doesn't carry any ambiguous being one of those, or irrelevant data or unnecessary data around it? It should be very specific. Consistent, does it stay in line with the business strategies? Or is it a requirement just because someone's always done it and it doesn't necessarily need to be carried forward? So there really should be a litmus test against requirements, and they should be understandable. So not only to the company so that you can validate them as being correct and what you need to go forward, but also understandable in the same language to a project team so that they're not walking away with a different assumption of what that requirement means. And then prioritize being a really big part of it. Prioritization of requirements is huge and what really can help you keep your scope and really help you understand, what is your MVP 1 or your phase 1 for go live? What's go live critical versus what is more of a nice to have? So prioritizing your requirements, organizing them, between functional areas, between dependencies. Sometimes it's good to model them if that's the way that they become concise, complete, and understandable. Maybe it's a requirement that has to kind of go through a developer and into a development team. So models, are very valuable at those times. Making sure there's assumptions or constraints and that they're verified and validated. You can see requirements are important, important to me anyway. And it just becomes a rinse and repeat. So you prepare them, conduct elicitation sessions, document them, and confirm that they were understood correctly. So really a business analyst or someone that's getting the requirements, their job is to learn the story of the company and translate them in a technical way for a project team to execute. So it's a skill set that's very specific. And also they're there to help initially engage and bring that user group through the change management. Process reviews, this goes a little bit back to the process documentation, right? You just really want to be careful that, a lot of times people will say lift and shift, meaning, are you trying to do exactly what you're doing now and just move it into a different solution? Typically not. So you really want to stay focused on what's the objective, not necessarily what you're just doing in current state. And you want to be careful that your requirements aren't requirements because of current system limitations, that you're really talking about true business requirements. It's also important to understand your company and the resource tolerance for change. I know when we have workforces where resources have been within a company for many, many years, that change or automation or technology is extremely scary for them. And you might have different functional areas that can absorb different levels of automation or change. So really being able to do evaluation of your work group is very important. And maybe understanding too the roles and responsibilities that are today with your current system might shift and be a little bit different in a new system. And so, your consultant should be able to take you through that type of evaluation. Kim, would you add anything around here?
I think one of the key things is understanding your company and your tolerance for change. That to me has been probably the biggest thing I've seen in implementations that have failed, right? Because they didn't address it early enough. They didn't plan for it. I've seen some companies have done a really great job at going out and saying, okay, we're going to do this project, and every week we're going to meet, we're going to talk about your concerns. So it really goes back to that whole change management.
Yep.
Yep.
Great. Thank you. And then I think assessing the current tools, right? A lot of times we'll walk in and a client will just want to only talk about their current ERP solution that they're using. And the thought is that that's what they're focused on to move into something else. And that's not it at all. You have to think about your entire ecosystem, because Excel is the biggest competitor of any ERP solution out there. And you may have, Excel sheets that are being used that aren't visible to everyone or shared, and it's data that should be within an ERP system. So you really want to look at what are any third-party solutions that are being used, maybe by a specific department. Are there integrations that are happening? Is it manual? Are there any integrations or data exchanges with outside stakeholders like customers or vendors? So you really want to look at your whole ecosystem and making sure that you maximize the ERP solution with as much of your business process and needs and objectives that can be there. And so a lot of times when you're evaluating those third-party solutions, especially if they're siloed within a single department, you need to evaluate, do we need to keep this? Is it serving a purpose? Do we need to replace it? Do we maybe need to automate the transfer of data, or should it just be removed and that data, it becomes obsolete because that now will be handled by the ERP? So I think it's just very important to consider your overall ecosystem, not just your current ERP solution and the next ERP solution.
I think it's also important to keep in mind what your roadmap is, right? So if you don't have an IT roadmap with your systems and what it's going to look like in the 2 to 3 years, as part of this process, it's not a bad idea to actually do that.
Mm-hmm. And it might not be able to be filled in all at once up front, right? It might kind of create itself as you move along and learn more information, but that's a great point.
Yep.
All right, data.
So, data, one of my favorites. So this is near and dear to my heart. I love data. I would spend all day just doing data if I could, but they don't let me. So, the biggest thing with data, everybody knows it. Garbage in, garbage out. And that bad data is going to cost you money. Good data is not going to cost you as much. So you're either going to spend the money now or spend it later. So some of the things that you can do is when you're looking at your data in the system, perfect example is purchase orders or sales orders. Do you have purchase orders that have been open for the last 5 years, or are you current? We've went into different customers and you look at their purchase order list and it's hundreds and thousands of documents because, we maybe received it, but we didn't receive it in full. So we never cleaned up the remaining outstanding purchase order. So there's easy things that you can do to make sure that your data is in good shape for an implementation. So going in, looking at your customers, looking at your items, looking at your vendors, block the ones that are not active, clean up anything, if somebody started an item, never filled it out, never got used, go ahead and delete those. So really take a hard look at what shape your data is in and go through and try and clean up as much as you can before you even start the project. And then as you're going through the project,
I was just going to say, I think it's important to do it while you're still in your current system, right? Because you're going to won't you do many iterations of data migration, or you might do like a front load and then do additions to it afterwards. So if you need something to be repeatable in terms of moving data, then cleaning up the source, I think, would be a good recommendation.
Yeah, yeah, I love to do that. And then what I like to do is you'll do an initial load. You'll figure out, oh, hey, wait, I want these couple of fields to get filled in, but I don't have it in my current system. So we'll figure out fields to maybe in their current system to use to fill in that data. So, like to your point, it's mapped over and you know where it's going to go. And I can just export the data, not have to have this middle stop where I kind of massage the data and then import it in. It's too easy to kind of mess that up. So, so a lot of times what we will do is really make sure that we have all the data we need, and you'll do it, I don't know, over the course of an implementation. I like to do it a couple times. And part of that happens as like a part of a mock go live. So data may get loaded, 3, 4 times on an implementation. Just depends on the size, how much data you have, and how much cleanup you have to do. So, definitely follow these 3 steps when you're looking at your data. And the big one too is to validate that you are capturing all of the data you need for reporting. So if you have a current set of reports now, it's good to go through those, map out where all that data is coming from, and then make sure you have the same data if possible in the new system, or maybe there's some data you don't actually need on there. So, and use it as an opportunity to streamline some of that.
Yep.
The other thing we want to do is assemble a cross-functional team with a good understanding of change management. So, can we go back maybe one or two?
Sorry.
That's okay. Carrie's getting ahead of me. She's like racing ahead. She's excited for the homework at the end. Some of the strategies for your people. So, the biggest thing is to make sure, you have to really be realistic about the fact that they have to do their day job. And how are you going to handle that whole change management? How are you going to handle how they do their day job while still contributing time to the project? And so there's a lot that goes into that. There's the realistic timeline. There's the change management that has to happen. And then, if possible, figure out who are your key people in this implementation. Like, who's your subject matter experts? Who's your team that's going to be in, the room? I like to call it a war room. A lot of people call it different things, but it's really the room where we're just going to be doing project deliverables all day long. So it's your subject matter experts. They're going to be the ones on the front line working with the implementation partner, getting everything done up front. And if you can, trying to figure out how you offload some of their work to maybe somebody that is up and coming. It's actually a great opportunity to figure out, is there somebody internally that you can kind of elevate maybe to the next level, right? So if a manager is in these meetings and they're working on all of the tasks, is there somebody in their group that can step up and help with some of that management that has to happen on the other people? So, looking at that and really taking a hard look at that is something that will help you be successful. And Carrie, do you have anything to add to that one?
No, I mean, one of the first things we said was this is exhausting, right? And I think even just talking about multiple iterations of data and considering the change management and requirements, I mean, it's an endeavor. And so the planning and the people really are what are going to make it a success overall.
Yeah, this is not a weekend getaway. This is an expedition, right?
No.
So and it should be treated as such, right? It's something, if you burn your people out right away, like if you overload them with a bunch of meetings up front when you first start the project and you already start burning them out on it, you've got like 8 months left to go. So it's like, don't burn them out in the first month. Really be intentional about what you're doing. So I like this.
You
I
like the oyster test.
I do like the oyster test. So I do like the oyster test. But I also there's another test I like as well. So what I'd like everybody to do is cross your arms. Just cross your arms. Just naturally, however you would cross your arms, cross your arms. Now, that feels pretty good, feels pretty natural. Now what I want you to do is uncross them and cross them the opposite way. So and it's going to feel like kind of weird. And you're like, I'm not even sure if that's the opposite. So that's
Most people
kind of
have to
what,
think about it. Yeah,
yeah,
most
I
people
mean,
have to think about it.
yeah, I'm not going to lie. I had to cross them, uncross them, cross them the right way, and then cross them the wrong way. Like, you know, but, doing some of those types of activities with your people really kind of help them see, oh, yeah, change is hard, right? It's a little uncomfortable. It's kind of uncomfortable to cross my arms the opposite way. I have to think about it. I have to be intentional about it, those types of things. This test, so I don't even remember where this came from, but try this with your people. So, how many people like oysters? Raise your hand if you don't like oysters. So, how many people don't like oysters? And then you have them put their hands down, and then you say, how many people have never tried an oyster and don't like oysters? So they'll raise their hand. And what's that prove? Like, they've decided they don't like it before they've even tried it. So I think it really is eye-opening for somebody to say, oh, wait, I didn't even try it, but I'm already decided I don't like it. Like, I just don't like it because it looks funny. It smells funny, maybe. They shouldn't smell funny. But it looks different. So having them kind of realize that, let's take, let's give it a chance. Let's give this project a chance. And let's not make up our minds right away that we don't like it without actually trying the system. So I think that's the moral of the story.
Yep.
And then we kind of already talked about this a little bit, but this is just a helpful slide for you. Is your team ready? Really be honest with yourself, because I actually was on a project. I got brought in because things were not going right, but I think it's the only project I've ever been in where I don't think they were actually ready for an implementation. Like, I would have told them no if it was my project to begin with, because they just couldn't handle it. And that project ended up being probably 2 to 3 times the cost what it should have been.
And that's where maybe some phasing comes into play, right? Like, if you do have a portion of the team that is ready and it's something that you can piece out and start and show success, then that's a way to kind of bring others along on the ride.
Yeah, unfortunately, it was such a small team, and they'd been there forever. They were like the core team that we got given to work with, just had no interest in making it actually work. So,
Can we then just move ahead so you can explain cave people? Because those are my favorite.
Well, I mean, they kind of are. They kind of were. So it is my favorite. Yep. So people on projects, you're going to run into these. There's multiple versions of these for project managers. So the people that you're going to run into are pioneers. They're the people they're out there, they're ready to go. They're already like in the system messing around before you even said do something in there. The yes people, they're just going to get on board because they feel like they should say yes and they should do this. Crowd followers, they're going to watch those two people ahead of them, the pioneers and the yes people, and they're going to say, okay, this seems okay, I'm going to do this. Skeptics, those are going to be the ones about, kind of, what about this? What about that? I'm not sure this is going to work, that type of stuff. And then you have our favorite, the cave people. And so they are citizens against virtually everything. So Carrie is correct. That project was full of cave people. Yes. So testing. Testing is one of my favorite things. I think the biggest thing with testing is that you want to find things that are wrong, and you should find things that are wrong. I think people are like, oh, we tested, we didn't find anything. I'm going to be suspicious and think, you didn't test good enough, especially if it's the first pass through. It is impossible to get everything right the first time. It just is. There's always going to be things that people forget. It's something they do every 6 months, maybe, or once every 6 months. And they just forgot to test that. Have super testers, super users who test, and then other end users that test. Testing can also sort of be used as training, because the more you do it, the more repetitive it is. You're essentially training yourself how to do it as well.
I think that kind of links back with data. I think taking the realization, if you have some, let's say, master records or even transactions, open transactions, and not a large volume, that is a great testing training exercise to just manually enter them and not think automatically it has to be through data migration, right? That's how you're going to test field validations. You're going to test, if you have different values to choose from, do you have all the values set up? It's going to kind of link right in with that.
I think also like have those super users test, and they know the way it should go through. They know the process, but then you also have to have the end users test that maybe are not as familiar, because you'd be amazed at what they might do that kind of is off the process, and they may actually find some bugs. So I've had that happen a couple times. So one guy ended up being a genius when everybody thought he was, kind of computer illiterate, but I'm like, he found a bug that no one's found.
I think too, a lot of times it's thought of that an ERP project is an IT project and not a business project, and it's both. So it would be
Exactly.
it would behoove you to have end users or the business process users testing, as well as if you do have an IT department or a group of IT resources, maybe the work share wasn't very balanced, but make sure it's both a business project as well as an IT project.
Yep, exactly.
Training.
Training. Oof. Training, testing and training both are some of the things that they get cut usually at the end, right? You have less testing time. Maybe you had 2 weeks planned for testing, you run out of time, so you only get 3. Training's the same way, and training is probably one of the most critical pieces that makes the project a success. Because it's again that pay now or pay later, and it's paid much more later. We've seen on projects where if you skip that training part, and you don't do the training, people are ending up with support requests and retraining for months after a go live, when it really should be like 2 weeks.
Planning the timing of the training is important so that you're
It is.
not falling into the retraining trap, right?
It is. It is. And I think having some initial training before people do testing is really helpful. Don't make them get into the system and the first day they're expected to execute tests, right? So training is also kind of sprinkled throughout. And at the end is kind of where you kind of do some of that training where it's like end users, where they're only doing like, especially in the warehouse, right? In the warehouse, they're doing transactions on handhelds that should take 5-10 minutes to actually master, right? You don't want to do that 8 months ahead of time. They're going to forget. So really figuring out where to plug that training in where it makes sense is huge. Also, make sure you mix it up, right? You're going to have learners that have different styles of learning. So some are going to be, I want to watch videos, I want to do it on my own. Some want work instructions that they can go through. Some are going to want like webinars where you're online with them, walking them through doing things. So just make sure you understand. Also micro learning. And that's kind of smaller sessions, right? We're going to look at this one small piece of functionality today. And then, tomorrow we're going to look at another small piece. So those might be 15 or 20-minute meetings. Make sure that people have hands-on. Don't lecture at them for like 4 hours. Make sure there's kind of like we're going to show you something, then we're going to give you some hands-on to do, so that it kind of mixes it up and it keeps them engaged in the actual training.
Yeah, you made a good point. I forget how many different learning styles there are. I think there's 3 or 4, but some learn by doing, some learn by watching, some learn by listening, and you never know what that learning style is for that individual person. So mixing it up is very important.
And I think that also the other piece of that is if people are in the office, have somewhere where they can go where there's like a computer lab, right? Like maybe it's a conference room. There's computers that are set up that are dedicated where they can actually do training. Or if they're remote, it's easy enough now, and especially since everything's online, make sure there is a sandbox that they can play with and do that training in. Yeah. Oh, the human brain. So
remember this. So here
yeah.
I don't know how many bullet points you have here, but I'm just going to go through.
Here's the thing. The human brain needs lots of caffeine, and I probably should have had coffee before this. But these are kind of common sense, right? We all know the human brain is very selective in what it can observe and keep in its memory, right? There is a limited capacity. Mine seems to be smaller than it used to be. It's very choosy in what it's going to retain. And so, I think you need to hear something like 7 times before you actually learn it. In my case, it's probably like 10 and some hands-on. But just keep that in mind, right? Like, I think a lot of companies get a little frustrated because there's one round of training. They're like, they should know this. And it's like, they
Yeah.
can't keep that all in. They have to have the hands-on and the repetition to reinforce it. And I think that's the key, is that a lot
Yeah.
of
What
people
comes into
don't realize that you need it to be reinforced so you can.
Yeah, what comes into play here is that fear factor. So when people walk into,
Yep.
let's say, a learning session, they're walking in with fear of the unknown, which automatically limits their capacity to absorb information. So a lot of the things we've talked about leading up to an actual training time and the change management, if you constantly are thinking, how am I reducing or mitigating this fear factor? It's going to open them up more and more and more to absorb more information as the project moves forward. But if you have that fear wall going into training, it automatically will not be absorbed at the level that you would find satisfactory.
Yeah. And I think, the big key here too is make sure that it's relevant training. It's going to be easier for them to remember. If you're having training on how to enter a customer, make sure they enter a customer for the next couple of days in a row. We've done that in the past too. Like, we have how to create a new customer, and each day somebody has to enter like 3 customers for like 4 days. So super easy things like that you can do. The forgetting curve. Not sure how many people have seen this, but it is a mathematical formula that originated in 1885. And this curve depicts the rate at which information is forgotten over time. So if there's no attempt or effort put towards retaining it. So, basically you sit in this class, you listen, or sit in this webinar and you've listened to us talk, and a day from now, you'll remember 40-50% of this. And then over the next couple of days, by the 7th day, you'll only remember that Carrie and I were funny and have done lots of implementations.
Pretty much.
Pretty much. Training plan and strategy. So we can't stress it enough. You really need to have solid plans for how you're going to handle the major pieces of an implementation. So, make sure you understand how are you going to handle navigation and personalization. Like, first time people are in BC, how are we going to train them all how to navigate around the system? Make sure you check out the different resources that you have available so you can use Microsoft Learn videos, process videos that maybe you record internally, how you're going to do your training for super users, make sure you have that planned out. And how are you really going to reinforce training throughout testing? I haven't seen too many people do this or want to do this, even when I bring it up. I don't know about you, Carrie.
The reinforcement part.
Yeah.
Reinforcement training through testing. Yeah, I've really found that if you really need to set up a testing structure where it's, X number of days a week for an hour, 2 hours, whatever it is, 3
Yeah.
hours. A lot of times it's great if you have, your consultant or partner like office hours. So they're there available so that if, testers or trainers come up with questions or errors as they're working through a process, it can get answered right away, right? But it really should be self-led at that point. But you also want to cut down on any frustration or annoyance by getting stuck on an error message. Now you don't want to stop everything, send an email, wait till the next day to get a reply, right? So if you set up some type of kind of quote unquote classroom structure week to week, I found that works very effectively.
And I think the next one, work instructions and test scripts, those are important. And I think one of the things that makes those successful is if the person, if the partner doesn't do them, the person who's implementing, their company does them themselves. Because then it's going to make more sense. It's going to sink in if they do the work instructions and test scripts.
It's going to be relevant, right, to that specific
Exactly.
company. And it's going to show your values on screen prints. Very
Exactly.
often, I suggest as you go through the individual workshops throughout an implementation, you have the recordings from them. And you can very easily pull those recordings back up, do screenshots, create process documents if you need to, or just have your own videos to refer back to.
Yep, perfect.
Okay.
Things to remember. Ooh, pay now or pay more later. That's definitely, we've seen that be true. Train the trainer doesn't work. So
what do you mean?
That might be a controversial statement. In certain scenarios it'll work, but you have to have the full support of the business. And what I've seen too many times is that the person that is picked to be the trainer has no experience in training and is not a good communicator. So if you don't pick the right person to be the trainer, it's not going to work. And so that's what I've seen a lot. They just pick the manager, right? A lot of times they'll pick the manager, and sometimes that manager isn't great at communicating with his own
Or maybe
people.
it's picking the champion, right? If you identified the champion. Yeah. And a lot of times end users will be like, well, my manager doesn't do the day-to-day. They don't understand.
Exactly.
And so they would rather hear it from somebody in their mind understands what they do day-to-day.
Exactly. Yeah. Train in small chunks. I think that one's a big one. Don't put them in a room for 40 hours in 1 week and just hit them with a fire hose. Just, have it be intentional and plan it out. Reinforced training, I think we've said that a couple times. And then plan for refreshers after go live. This I like because going into the different groups, what you can find is that sometimes after go live, a certain department, they'll all be doing the same thing. And there's 5 people in the accounting department and they're all entering or processing, journals different ways. And so going in afterwards and kind of sitting down and saying, hey, what's working, what's not working? Is there something you guys need more information about? Maybe there's a session about, how to do journal entries according to our processes, or having them, test them on the process documents. There's a lot of things you can do after go live to kind of reinforce some of that stuff and then figure out what needs to be done. Do we just need to do a quick refresher training on how to do journal entries?
And it goes back to the forgetting curve, right? So they went through training or a series of trainings and they didn't retain everything. So the refreshers are meant to, okay, now that you have the basics and the foundation, let's get back into some of those more unique situations or exception situations type of thing. But remember, they didn't retain it all. So you need the refreshers.
Yep. Rollout and evaluation. So do at least one mock go live. I know some partners don't plan for mock go lives, but a lot of times you don't actually need a partner to actually do a mock go live. So it kind of depends if you're loading your own data, that type of stuff. But definitely do one mock go live because that is the thing that will prevent surprises on go live day. I don't want any surprises on go live day. And the only way you're going to know if you're going to have a surprise is if you actually go through it and attempt it just as if it's going to happen. And then you figure out what are the issues.
And you're checking your test scripts, right? Your data scripts that you might have written all along the way. And again, you're mitigating surprises.
Yep. And I think it's a good test. It's a little bit better now, but it's a good test to see how long it's going to take to load your data. I have found where we had a 12-hour window to go live, and it actually took us 16 hours to load data. So we had to kind of figure out, how are we going to do this? Are we going to load some history the couple days leading up to it? How do we keep track? Blah, blah, blah. Be realistic with your go live date. Don't don't try and implement BC in 2 months unless you're finance only and there's not a lot of complexity. It's very rare that you're going to implement manufacturing, warehousing, service, and all full financials in like 3 months. So just be realistic with your go live date. Create a checklist for anything that matters. I mean, if checklists are good enough for NASA, they're great for me. So I always have like an implementation checklist. I have a business process checklist. I have like 10 checklists that I use during an implementation. And it's very nice so that I can just check it off. People know what's happening, what's done, and what needs to be done when. Communication plan for when things go wrong. This is, on implementation day, you don't want to be like, how do I get a hold of so-and-so? I need somebody to get here and unlock the server room, or I need somebody to come in because a router's down or something like that. So making sure you have everybody's phone numbers, all of that type of stuff. Define everyone's role and task for the rollout. So this is, making sure everybody has a job, knows what they're going to do. And all of these things get built as part of that mock go live. So while you're going through that mock go live, you're identifying, oh, wait, I forgot. We need this person to be here to do this piece of it.
And I think that checklist too, that really can be time-based. I think a lot of people use terms like a T-minus 45-day calendar or something like that, where it's your list of tasks you need to do for go live, but not all of them have to be done the day before or the weekend before. Some of those things can be done leading up to over the previous weeks. So, keep that in mind because it's already going to be a crunch time anyway.
Yeah. And like the biggest thing is to like clean up sales orders and purchase orders. Those should start on day one. So, that kind of piece of the checklist is pretty high up.
And something you don't have to pay a partner for. That should just be homework.
Exactly.
Do that while the partner's planning and going through requirements. That's all work that can be done that can take noise away from the project itself. This we have in the end of the presentation, but really it's something to think about in the beginning. How are you going to evaluate success of this project? What does success mean? So I think it's really important during that project planning or getting the background of why you are where you are, establish KPIs or measurements that you are trying to achieve. So you have something to compare to post-implementation. Now, it might not be taking a 15-day close to a 2-day close. That might not happen the first month, but by the third month, if that was the goal and it was achievable, you should be able to do a compare. You may have also put in items that were kind of a parking lot of enhancements or nice to haves, and go and revisit those, post go live. Now that you have stabilized, more about the system and the data, do you need to go off with all these nice to haves? Maybe they were nice to haves because of the previous system you may have been on. So understand, do they still have current relevance, business impact or need? So it's really important, I think, to just continue to reevaluate requirements always. And then, each of the kind of KPIs or measurements, SMART. So specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound are just kind of some characteristics to keep in mind when coming up with those. And these are really just some, I think, tools that Kim and I have found along the way that have been really good in terms of talking about teams, how to have high performing teams. And then that angles exercise, if you're interested in using that image, there's the kind of author of that called Relativity. And that concludes. So we really appreciate you joining us and look forward to any questions or further conversations we can have.
All right. Thank you, Carrie and Kim. That was great. And thank you again to everyone who joined us today. We appreciate your time and participation. Before we head out, I want to remind you to keep an eye on your inbox for a follow-up email, which will include a link to the webinar recording and any additional resources mentioned. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.